It's the show after the show. This is the After 9 podcast with Scott and Kat.
Hey friends, welcome to this special solo Scott edition of After 9. It is a holiday today, so Kat is off. I'm off too, actually. I'm bringing you this one from my home studio. And on a day like today, it's a good day with radio committed to truth and reconciliation initiatives. Today's a great day for me to have a chat with you like we used to do from time to time on these solo Scott episodes. What I like to do on these episodes is focus on some of the things that we can't go too in-depth on After 9. It's not really a political podcast, although political issues do come up from time to time. I want to talk about the middle class, I want to talk about the economy, and I want to talk about politics. You know, I've been thinking about it a lot. There's so much talk about why we need an election here in Canada. And frankly, when the polls say 70% of the country want an election, I can't handle the gaslighting that's coming out of this government who keeps trying to tell us we don't want an election. Now, I don't want you to think this whole episode is going to be anti-Trudeau. I don't like the guy. Not anymore anyway. I had a lot of hope for him when he got elected, but frankly, that was not as advertised. That slogan from way back in 2014 was well written, not as advertised. Who would have thought, even 4 years ago, that Canada today would look like Canada does? We got a big crime problem. We've got a lot of people who are dealing with some serious money issues right now, and all of it leads back to one source. All of it goes back to one place. But we'll get to that a little later on in this episode of After 9. I think our politicians think we, the people, are stupid. I really do. You know, I watch some of the nonsense that goes on in the House of Commons. Our highest elected chamber is the House of Commons. And let's not forget how the House of Commons works. We, the people, in the communities that we live in, we pick one person to go to Ottawa and represent us. And I live in Burlington, so I'll use that example. I have a member of parliament from Burlington. That person's job is to speak about Burlington issues in the House of Commons. Does your member of parliament really focus on you and your community and the needs of your community? Or is your member of parliament going to Ottawa, taking a massive check, acting like a jackass in the House of Commons, and not really caring what the people who live on your street and in your community care about? I don't see a lot of members of parliament that are fighting for their constituents, and that's a big problem. That in itself means government has lost its way. How are these so-called adults acting in the House of Commons? Let's hear a little bit from number one, the Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I withdraw the comment about defecating.
Yeah, that's our Prime Minister. He lost it the other day in the House of Commons. I'll play a longer clip for you. It was another answer, but in context, this still works. It's the Prime Minister trying to explain where he was coming from when he made that comment. Listen to this.
Speaker, it's obvious that the Leader of the Opposition really didn't like that I went down to New York City to talk directly to Americans. Perhaps he would have been happier if I accepted an all-expenses-paid trip perhaps down to Florida to appear at an anti-abortion church. I know he would have been all right with that because that's what he allows of his own members. Every time the Leader of the Opposition gets up on his feet to rhyme off his little show, his party members applaud enthusiastically. But the two times he just stood up to suggest that he is perhaps pro-choice, silence from his team, Mr. Speaker. He cannot protect women's rights from the members of his own caucus, Mr. Speaker. That's not standing up for women. That's not protecting the future. That's not freedom.
And you know, he almost lost track of the fact that he had to stand up in the House and apologize there because of his conduct in the House of Commons. It's crazy that these politicians go to Ottawa and they get asked direct questions that are of interest to the people, and they refuse to answer the questions. They just want to get their talking points out on the news, and that's what the Prime Minister is doing. I'll give you a little history lesson for those who don't remember. Over the years, there's been a real battle between the left and the right. And one of the things the left has always been able to do, when I say left, by the way, I mean liberal, New Democrat, parties like that. On the right would tend to be parties like the Conservative Party or the People's Party. Well, for years, maybe even decades, the left has tried to accuse the right here in Canada of being anti-abortion. The reality is it's a desperation tactic. That's something our prime minister and his people that sit behind him in the House of Commons like to bring up when things are going badly. They like to try and gaslight you and scare you into thinking the Conservatives are going to take away abortion rights. That's not going to happen. If it was going to happen, it would have happened years ago. It's not going to happen. Now, are there members of the Conservative Party that are anti-abortion, that are not pro-choice? Yeah, there probably are. It tends to be a more right-leaning issue. Does that mean this is ever going to go to a vote in the House of Commons? No, not anytime soon. This is a country where we give women the right to choose on most topics. If it's vaccines and things like that, you don't get a choice. But when it comes to abortion issues, it's not going to change. And, you know, I think even the left is surprised that people aren't falling for it this time. I'm glad to say that people aren't falling for it this time, because in the past, that's something that has scared voters into voting left. And that seems to be the MO. I mean, it's hard to deny. You've got cabinet ministers that are standing up in the House of Commons insisting Canadians don't want an election when they know full well Canadians really want an election. About 70% of Canadians want an election right now. And the talking points are, it's frustrating because you'll get the Liberals saying that, the left, I don't want to just say the Liberals, it is the left. The left will say things like Pierre Poilievre is only trying to force an election right now for his own political interests. Let's be honest, there's probably some truth to that. Pierre Poilievre, I think, has good intentions. I think he wants to return Canada back to the way most of us remember that it was. A kind, caring, compassionate country that helps keep the peace around the world, that welcomes newcomers, that treats people with respect and dignity, and is fairly well off financially, but isn't afraid to support other nations that are struggling. That's the Canada that I remember, and we don't look anything like it right now. We used to have safe streets. We didn't have the drug problems that we have now. We never used to have tent cities. People have lost a lot of money over the last 4 years, and it's not even being reported very accurately, to tell you the truth. If we have time, we'll come back to that as well and talk about the media gaslighting. Politicians gaslighting their own citizens? That's wrong. I want a leader who wants to have a vision for Canada and execute that vision. Right now, all I hear out of Pierre Poilievre is slogans. You know it. We're going to axe the tax. We're going to fix the crime. We're going, what is it he says? I'm sure you guys probably remember. I don't. He said it so many times, and I know why he does it. Marketing executives, campaign executives, they're all going to tell Pierre the same thing. You got to keep saying it and saying it and saying it, and eventually it'll sink in. I don't know if that's effective. There was a time when it probably would have been, but I think people are so skeptical about our politicians right now that I don't know if that's working for Pierre Poilievre. At some point, Pierre is going to have to come out and lay out his vision for Canada. I want to see it. I'm a conservative, and I want to see what this vision for Canada is. You know, when you say you're going to end the crime, how? To me, there's some legislative options that you can go down. You could hire more police officers. You could tell the police to actually start enforcing the law, because it doesn't seem like in some cases they are evenly. We've got a lot of hateful protests walking down our streets right now, and nobody seems to care. Nobody seems to be doing anything about that. How are you going to fix the crime, Pierre? How are you going to fix the housing crisis? I know that you're saying you're going to link new builds to immigration. Not going to let more people in than we have homes for. That's good. That's a good, sound policy. If you want high-rise towers up everywhere with condos for people, they have to be near transit. Okay. I mean, hey, that's a viable solution too. If you're going to be in a condo, maybe you are the type who's going to want to take transit. I don't know. But we need more of a plan. We need to know exactly what you want to do. And our current leaders that keep insisting we don't want an election and we do like the carbon tax, well, that's just ridiculous. Let's go back to that issue that happened in the House of Commons. Why did that start? Apparently, someone on the conservative side suggested that when Justin Trudeau was in New York visiting our envoy, that's Tom Clark, former CTV reporter. He's our envoy to New York. Is it envoy? I don't know what he is. I don't know. I can't keep track of these people anymore. There's a lot of people making a lot of money, living pretty high on the hog around the world, representing Canada's interests. We got Tom Clark and Bob Ray in New York alone. How much is that costing us? We just bought a penthouse on Billionaires Row for Tom Clark. And one of the conservative members of parliament, in what I think was a fairly childish remark, suggested that Justin Trudeau was sharing a bathtub with Tom Clark in New York. Did he check it out? I don't know if he checked it out. Does have a gold-plated tub in it. That seems a little excessive for a public servant who's going to be working and living in New York. I don't know why we need a penthouse on Billionaires Row. They say it's cheaper to have this place than to maintain the old place. I don't know why we needed either place. Rent a meeting room. Go to Starbucks if you need to meet somebody. Do what other people do when they're trying to keep costs down. We need to keep costs down because we are broke. Well, it was a childish remark from the conservative member that said it. The prime minister addressed it, and even he didn't handle it right.
I'm always going to stand up to bullies. When anyone makes a homophobic comment, I will respond, and that's something I need to do.
What if TP2 tries to withdraw?
Well, that's it. That's all we get from the prime minister on that. The person who said it suggests it wasn't homophobic. I don't see it any other way. Kind of seemed that way anyway. Listen, we need a little bit of decorum in Ottawa right now. Slogans from the opposition, sell out Singh, and whatever else he's calling everybody else. Listen, that looks a little Trumpian. I'm sorry it does. And frankly, there's still a lot of Canadians that are worried about Trump being reelected. Pierre, if that's your strategy, the slogans, I get that your marketing people tell you it's a good idea, but I really don't know that it's a good idea, even if it is true. Who's Jagmeet Singh? He's the leader of the New Democratic Party. Jagmeet Singh really wants his pension, and he can deny it until he's blue in the face, but I don't see him saying, if I do stay in office long enough to collect my pension, I won't accept it. I haven't heard anything like that from Jagmeet Singh. Jagmeet is going to get a pension if he can play the long game and drag this parliament out a little bit longer. He's going to get a big pension that'll cost taxpayers a couple $1 million. I don't understand why he won't confront that. It's an entitlement to elected members of office. They're allowed a pension. Pierre Poilievre has a big pension because he was elected a long time ago. He has been a servant of his riding for a while, and he's entitled to a pension. Jagmeet, you have to be in a certain number of years to get your pension. And frankly, Canadians want an election. Now, if you can manage to get reelected, you'll have no problem collecting your pension. No problem at all. But I think even Jagmeet's a little worried he might not get reelected in his own riding, and that would mean he doesn't get his pension. Are we really holding the Canadian public hostage over a pension for one member of parliament? Give the guy his pension now and tell him to call an election. I'd be willing to do that. Canadians are broke. I don't need to tell you that. You're probably a middle-class Canadian listening to this podcast. I don't know how many wealthy people we have listening, but you're probably middle class. So am I. We've got a government in Ottawa that can't even identify what middle class is or how much money you need to make to be considered middle class. It's craziness. We've got these adults standing up in the House of Commons shouting slogans, not answering questions, and calling each other names with loosely veiled homophobic comments. It's not right. These are adults. You wouldn't see two kids running for student council talk to each other the way Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh, and Pierre Poilievre talk to each other. So what do we do from here? Where do we go from here? How can we solve this problem? Well, I really think we need an election. An election is going to solve a lot of problems because there's a lot of Canadians who have watched their member of parliament not do their business in parliament. They've done the business of the leader. The Liberals, for those who don't remember, when Stephen Harper was in power, used to criticize Stephen Harper because he would have all his MPs vote a certain way. It was a big deal if an MP was allowed to vote their conscience and vote the way that they want to vote on a particular issue. Not for a second do I think that every elected Liberal member of Parliament right now likes that carbon tax. I believe there's a lot of Liberals right now who would love to get rid of the carbon tax because that's their last hope at trying to get reelected. Latest polls are out. It's bad news for the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister is now going fourth behind the Bloc and the New Democrats and the Conservatives, who are on pace to win an epic majority government. You don't turn an entire country against you unless you've done something wrong. And frankly, 7 out of 10 Canadians really want their voice heard at the ballot box. Denying Canadians an election right now is an affront to democracy. And they try and spin it around. This is part of the gaslighting. Canadians don't want an election. Pierre Poilievre is only looking out for his own political interests. I mean, okay, that's one way to look at it, but so is the left. So is the government of today, which right now happens to be made up of Liberals, New Democrats, and members of the Bloc Québécois, the Separatist Party. The Liberals are actually in bed with them. They're considering meeting Bloc demands just to keep themselves in power for another month. The Bloc has said they'll bring down the government if the government doesn't comply with their demands. Why are we being held hostage by separatists to decide when the rest of the country gets to vote? It's crazy. And when the government comes out and says something like Canadians don't want an election, presuming to speak for all of us, like they smugly do. And that's the only way to put it. It's smug. They're actually looking out for their own electoral interests because they know they'll lose if we go to a vote today. We need to have an election. We need cooler heads to prevail. And we need the leaders to start acting like adults. Why is our Prime Minister talking about sitting in the tub and using foul language in Parliament? Why won't he answer a very simple question? There's so many different scandals out right now. The Green Slush Fund seems to be the new one. We created a multi-billion-dollar slush fund where we can just fund different green projects. Where did that money go? What's it being used for? Do we have a strategy for what projects we're going to fund? I'll give you an example. You've probably seen it yourself. Online right now, there's a meme going around of a solar panel farm that's built over a parking lot in Walmart. Somewhere along the line, somebody had this brilliant idea that maybe it's not a good idea to cover up great farmland with solar panels. Put the solar panels in a parking lot. People can park underneath them. It keeps their car shaded, and we're not using up farmland. That's a great idea. That could be part of our strategy when it comes to being green. Do we even have a strategy, or are we just handing out money to everybody who goes to a Liberal member of Parliament and says, hey, guess what I can do? It appears we don't even vet these people. Let's go back to COVID. How many contracts got signed? How many billions of tax dollars were sent out to projects that ended up going nowhere? We know there were insiders that got very, very wealthy. We funded projects and companies took that money and never delivered a thing. The ArriveCan app is a great example. What happened there? How did we spend that much money on that app? I don't know if these people, the current government, are the ones who should really be deciding where all that green money goes. Not without a strategy, not without a plan to really offset carbon emissions if that truly is the goal. The green revolution is going to make some people extremely wealthy. Those who have already got the inside track or who have got access to decision makers, people who can approve different handouts of government tax dollars, they've got the clear advantage. What about you and I? They talk about how the green revolution is the future. Can you and I get in on that? Because it doesn't seem like we can. It seems like there's a real exclusive club that's getting all the money. Seems like it anyway. And now when the government has been ordered to produce documents on where this money went, how the decision process was made, they're obstructing it. That's not right. Our government is supposed to be accountable to the people, to you and I. And they're not. The opposition should be able to ask a question and get an answer. And if the government doesn't answer, the speaker has an obligation to help get that answer out of that minister. And if they won't answer, it should be national news every single time one of our federal politicians won't answer the question. But it's not. They get a pass. They stand up there in Parliament collecting their pensions and their massive paychecks, and they've got their drivers and their staff, their social media team. They've got all of it. They're living life pretty high on the hog there in Ottawa, and they aren't representing their people. They aren't talking about the issues that are actually affecting their constituents. Canadians want an election. Despite what the government says, they do want an election. We know that 70% of the country wants an election, and we still aren't there yet. And frankly, I don't understand why. We don't have the names of the so-called traitors. I don't know if they're traitors, by the way. We know that there was foreign interference allegations against a number of members of parliament. And for whatever reason, we're not being told anything about that. Why? Those people work for us. When did we forget that? That parliament is a function of the population. It's a function of the people. We, the people, elect people to represent us. And when they stop doing that, we have every right to be angry. Again, 70% of the country wants an election. Pierre Poilievre wants to make this election about the carbon tax. He essentially wants to make it a referendum. Re-elect the Liberals and the NDP if you want the carbon tax. Well, we all know how that's going to go. And frankly, I think Canadians have had just about enough of this carbon tax. We're one of the only countries paying it. How are we going to change the world when China, India, the USA, and all these other big polluters aren't doing their part? We're not going to have an impact. We're just making ourselves broke. And please don't mistake this for me. Please don't think that I am in some way opposed to green initiatives. I'm 100% in favor of any initiative that gives us cleaner air, cleaner water, or a more sustainable environment. Do we even have the right guy running the department? Let's hear a little bit from our environment minister, Stephen Guilbeault. One of his responsibilities is forest management. We just had one of our national treasures, Jasper National Park, burned to the ground. Turns out he was warned that this was a distinct possibility. He was warned that there was a lot of dead pine because of a beetle infestation. It was a tinderbox. Listen to this and see if this is a satisfactory answer for you, the taxpayers.
Yellowhead, Jim Iglinski brought forward on the floor of the House of Commons in 2017 to the Environment Minister then, said they take this serious issue very seriously. Then in 2018, Jasper Park Superintendent said Parks Canada takes this issue very seriously. Once again, nothing done. In 2018, two professional foresters wrote to the previous environmental minister saying this is not a matter of if, but when the town of Jasper will burn. Your government didn't even respond. Time and time again, you say you take this very seriously, how forests are going to be protected and towns are going to be protected, but yet no action. Does the government accept responsibility for the failure to protect the people in the town of Jasper? Yes or no?
With a brief answer, Minister. We invested about 40 times as much as this Harper government in order to prevent forest fires in Jasper.
You invested 40 times more than the previous government. It's $80 million, in case you're wondering. $80 million and the forest still burned down? Because the previous government spent $2 million and everything was fine. I feel like these aren't serious people. I feel like they want to be known as noble individuals who are trying to protect our environment and our ecosystems, but their actions don't match it. And that's a huge problem. That's a huge problem. In addition to actually governing, we need these people to run the country. There's business to be done. Things have to be done. And it doesn't seem like this government is all that interested in doing the work. How many different times have we seen these scandals? Oh my God. We've got the passport fiasco, immigration issues. The list goes on and on and on. Is the government really not interested in running the government? Seems like a big issue. Let's hear right now from the government House leader, Karina Gold, who not my MP, but is an MP from Burlington.
What he has been able to achieve is to limit and decrease the rights of Canadians. So when he talks about making Canada the freest country in the world, the only thing he's ever done is take people's freedoms away, Madam Speaker.
That's Karina just gaslighting the crap out of Canadians into thinking that Pierre Poilievre is going to take away their rights. Okay, I mean, it's an outrageous accusation. It really is. But Pierre Poilievre, you have an obligation now to stand up and say, that's not true. For a couple of weeks now, the media has given the left a real free pass to go on these talking points. Oh, Pierre has plans to cut this and cut that. He's going to cut dental care. He's going to cut $10 a day child care. Well, since the accusation's out there, and since we know an election is coming at some point in the semi-near future, I think Pierre Poilievre has an obligation to come out and say, no, we won't cut dental care. Or, yes, we are going to cut dental care, and here's the alternative. It's really time that everybody put their cards on the table. If we're talking about having an election, we need to know where everyone stands. The Liberals and the NDP are going to call the shots on when we have an election. There's no changing that. And nearest I can tell, because I haven't seen any other evidence to the contrary, Jagmeet Singh is playing the long game to make sure he gets his pension. He wants to drag it out that far. He's more interested in dragging out this parliament to get his pension than he is in having an election and simply being reelected, which again would also make sure he gets his pension. He doesn't seem to have any interest in getting reelected. This is just a long game. It's about money. It's about interest. It's about power. And we, the people, are suffering. I realize I'm getting a little low on time here, and we've talked a lot about government. There's a lot to do here. But two more things I want to mention. One on government. Let's say we do have an election in December. If the Bloc does bring down the current government, we would likely have an election sometime in the month of December. The Bloc gave a deadline of October 29th to have their initiatives, their goals passed by the current government. Well, when we do have an election, we're going to have a whole other set of issues to deal with because we have a Senate in Canada that is unelected. The government of the day appoints senators. Justin Trudeau, when he was elected, promised us he was going to reform things in Ottawa. He said we were even going to change the way we vote. We would get rid of the first past the post system and come up with something that's truly more representative of the people. Well, we don't have it yet. It's been 9 years and we still don't have it. We also have an appointed Senate. The Senate can overrule anything that comes out of the House of Commons. So if Pierre Poilievre does on day one say, we are going to axe the tax, I think Canadians are going to be thrilled to axe the tax because frankly, it doesn't seem to be all that effective. We're not meeting our targets. Canadians are going broke. And this lie that we get back more than we pay in is really starting to impact people who are out of money. Well, Pierre Poilievre needs to get that passed through the Senate. And I don't know if he's going to, because the vast majority of the Senate was appointed by Justin Trudeau over the last 9 years. So if Pierre Poilievre does win, and there's no reason to think he won't, I don't remember the Conservative Party ever having this much support. Not in my lifetime. It's got to be close to 50%. I do think there's some bias in the polls there. It's got to be 50 or higher that the Conservatives are at. They'll win a supermajority in the House of Commons. However, without a Senate that's cooperative, they might not be able to get anything passed. It's going to create a constitutional crisis. That's what's coming. Get ready for it because the Senate is all loyal to Justin Trudeau. The vast majority of them, because he appointed them. It's an appointment for life. Not only do we need to reform the way we vote, we need to reform the Senate. Stephen Harper was on a path to electing senators. He thought your senators should be elected just the same way your House of Commons is. To tell you the truth, I really don't even know if we're going to have a Senate in 4 years. I think Canadians have just about had enough paying for that upper chamber, especially if that Senate chamber tries to obstruct what the duly elected government of the day wants to do. The Senate was always intended to be a sober second thought. Parliament can go and do whatever they want, but they'll get checked by the senators who are going to make sure that all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and that the will of the people is being done. I have a feeling that the Senate is going to become a real issue in the next year. A couple other things that I want to get to in this episode is the economy. We are now, 22, 23 days away from the next interest rate announcement from the Bank of Canada. If you go back and listen to other episodes of After 9, I've been pretty clear over the years that when we started raising interest rates at these insane levels, after the Bank of Canada told us that interest rates would remain low for the foreseeable future, they jacked those rates up at an astronomical pace. A lot of people lost their home. A lot of people are in massive, massive debt, and nobody in Ottawa seems to care. This is Canada in 2024, and we have tent cities popping up everywhere. Millions are using food banks in Canada in 2024. And what do we get from the Bank of Canada? Now that they've finally so-called tamed inflation, they haven't, by the way. Inflation was, 2% last month? That's 2% more than last year, which was 14% than the year before, and it was 17% higher the year before that. It goes year over year. So nobody should be taking a victory lap here on the fact that inflation is only 2%. It's 2% higher than last year at this time, meaning we're still paying way more for the basic goods and services that we always used to be able to get at a reasonable price, and they're no longer reasonable. Why isn't our government stepping in here? Our only solution was to raise interest rates and bankrupt the country? Our only solution was to make banks wealthy, which is all we've done. When you signed your mortgage papers 5 years ago or whatever, and you agreed to an interest rate of 2.39%, and then because the Bank of Canada went nuts starting to raise interest rates, now your interest rate might be 6.5%. Somebody owes you an apology. That was mismanagement. And now we're at a position where they've so-called tamed inflation and they can start to lower the rates. I don't know if those Bank of Canada governors living in their ivory towers, looking down from Bay Street to the rest of the country, can really relate to what the middle class is going through right now. Every month, it's a struggle to put food on the table, to pay all the bills, to pay your property taxes, to do all those things, because every level of government has a hand in this. Municipally, they just raised our taxes like crazy again. Do they not realize their own people can't afford that? Why are they putting lofty goals like these municipalities all seem to have ahead of the fact that Canadians can't afford to live right now? That's the main thing. You need food on the table and your bills paid. That's a minimum that we should be promised here in Canada, and it's not happening. So the Bank of Canada is sending out all these mixed signals. Oh, yeah, we're going to keep cutting interest rates. Maybe a quarter point, and then maybe we'll do a half point. Are you crazy? You son of a bitch. Tiff Macklem, Bank of Canada guru here. Get off your butt and drop rates 1.5 points. Drop them a point. Put it right back to where it was before you screwed it up. This inflation that we just went through, I have a hard time believing the narrative. Government wants us to think it was supply chain issues, the war in Ukraine. I don't understand how a war in Ukraine could affect wheat prices in Canada, where we grow more wheat than they do. How is that even possible? It seems like they're gaslighting us again, trying to make it seem like, oh, this is all natural, this was all expected. No, it wasn't. After COVID, a lot of companies saw an opportunity to make back the money that they didn't make during the pandemic. They raised prices. We all know that. Anybody who goes to a store or eats food, or all of us, we all know what they did. Raising interest rates to try and combat that, I mean, I guess in the long term it did. It bankrupted everybody. Nobody has any money. And now businesses are really going to suffer. I don't know if we're getting accurate numbers on unemployment. I don't know why we're not getting accurate numbers on the amount of insolvencies and bankruptcies, but I'm here to tell you, it's bad out there, and nobody seems to care. We're facing an impending financial crisis. The Bank of Canada needs to drop interest rates just as quickly as they raise them. None of this, we'll drop it a quarter point and see what the effect is. The Bank of Canada is already on record saying that it's a lagging indicator. A change to interest rates now, we won't see the effect for months, if not a year or more. So start dropping them rapidly now, because Canadians need a break. We really, really do. We've got this big election coming up in the States right now. We know the Americans are going to be voting. There's a big issue affecting America right now. It's immigration. That also happens to be affecting Canada right now. When people are broke and resources are this stretched, and we are prioritizing people coming to Canada and setting them up with way more than what regular Canadians have, that's a problem. And Americans are dealing with the exact same thing. Why? The Americans, at least it's somewhat understandable. The government, the Joe Biden administration, opened up the border, the southern border. People were just crossing. They would just walk into the country and say, ta-da, I'm here. We don't have a southern border to allow that. We actually had to import people here. It was done intentionally. And I don't know if we're ever going to get a true answer from the government on why they did it, but it seems like it was in lockstep with what the government in the U.S. was doing. And I can't think of a good reason for it. But it wasn't necessary. We brought people here and we don't have anywhere for them to live. Eventually, we're going to have to turn off the taps and stop handing out these supports that we're handing out now. It has to be done. And that's going to be a cruel and inhumane process to people who came here for a better life. It's wild what's going on right now, but people in Ottawa really need to grow up. Pierre, knock it off with the slogans. Let's start talking about policy. You need to be acting like a prime minister in waiting. I'm telling you, man, it'll pay off for you in the long run if you start acting like a prime minister in waiting. Sometimes it's right there. And then other times we get dumb stuff. Knock it off with the nicknames, dude. You got to stop. Let's worry about governing. Let's worry about the people. And Justin Trudeau, you get those polls. Polls are essential to political parties. We know how much they mean to you. 70% of the country wants an election. If you truly believe that you're on the right track and that Canadians support you, I don't understand what you're afraid of. Call an election. That's all people want. They want to have their say. They want their voice heard. They're not satisfied with what's going on right now. Call an election. I would have more respect for Justin Trudeau if he went down to Rideau Hall and said, Mary, I need you to dissolve Parliament and call an election because it's time the Canadian people weighed in on what's going on in this country. How could you not respect that? Technically, he's allowed to govern until next year or until he's lost the confidence of the people. The people have lost confidence, 70%. Yet our elected representatives that we all send to Ottawa are not echoing that sentiment in the House of Commons. And it's crazy. To turn around and say Canadians don't want an election is absolutely ridiculous. We need an election desperately. Canadians want their say. And even if we end up in exactly the same spot we're in right now, at least Canadians will have had a chance to make their voice heard. We got to stop pretending this is a democracy until we start acting like a democracy. One of the best things we could do for democracy is start presenting reasonable proposals for how to move the country forward. We're not going to go on some mass deportation spree here in Canada. I know that's what Trump wants to do in the States. We're not going to do it here in Canada, I don't think. But somebody needs to come up with a plan for how we're going to settle all of these people that were allowed into Canada. Hundreds of thousands of them. We were handing out Canadian passports like it was Halloween. Now we got to deal with it. We've got to get our economy right before we face a catastrophic collapse. And it's very possible that something like that is coming. We're one bank failure away from complete insolvency. And that's scary to me. Something needs to change. If you're as frustrated as everybody else that I hear from, and I get a lot of DMs from people on a day that tell me the saddest stories you've ever heard. It's terrible what's going on right now. Horrible what's going on. I really want our elected representatives in Ottawa to start talking policy, to remember who sent them there, and to remember their main jobs. You need to protect the people of Canada, and you need to spend our money responsibly. Our money is not being spent responsibly right now. It's not. It's being wasted. And then they come back to us and say, well, now you got to pay more. No, we don't need to pay more. We're one of the most overtaxed nations on earth. Now it's time to start spending properly, and it starts with electing a responsible government that's accountable to the people. Have yourselves a great day, everybody. Thank you for letting me rant just a little bit. Kat and I will be back tomorrow.